All right, welcome to the next installment of Eclectic Corrales. Today we're talking to Jeff Radford, who is the longtime editor of the Corrales Comment in Corrales. So, Jeff, when did you move out here?
I moved out here in 1976, and it was just looking for a place to reintegrate back in the United States. My family, we had been living abroad primarily in Africa and South America, and all of a sudden my son was 5 years old and he hadn't been back in the States since he was 6 months old. So we were looking around for a place, and my wife at that time didn't want to live in a cold place. So
Right.
So Corrales was chosen.
Perfect. So you've enjoyed living here, and that was the reason for moving out here. And you started, when did you start the Corrales Comment?
Well, in 1982, we moved out here in 1976, as I said. I had wanted to start a small town newspaper ever since I was reporting from Africa. And a lot of the foreign correspondents seemed like every one of them said that what they really wanted to do was to go back to the States and start a small town newspaper, a weekly or something like that. So I said, well, if it's such a good idea, maybe I'll just go and do it. They were all 60s, or I said, well, no, I'll just go do it if it's a good idea.
While you were still young.
While I was still young. And I forgot exactly how old I was at the time, but I had been involved in newspaper work since high school. I was the high school newspaper editor, and that was in my first couple of years of high school, I was the school newspaper cartoonist. And so at the end of my junior year, the teacher advisor came to me and said he wanted me to be the editor in my senior year. And I said, I'm the cartoonist. But he convinced me to do it, and then that led to a university. I had and this come in later to the conversation, but I had gotten a scholarship to Syracuse University by competing in a statewide competition that was mounted by the Maxwell School of Citizenship.
That's interesting.
It certainly is. I don't know anybody else who graduated from the School of Citizenship. And knowing my background here in Corrales, one could see the connection there.
Yeah.
So, I actually went into the Syracuse University in the art school, still planning to be, an art major, and I did that and did well, but I really missed academics because in high school, I studied a lot. And when I got into art school, I missed the studying part, the academic part.
Right.
So I changed.
The challenge, so to speak, along those lines.
So I switched over into journalism and international relations, political science. And so that's what my degree is in from Syracuse. And at Syracuse, I started two other people and I started a sort of an off-campus, on-campus magazine. It was called The Sword of Damocles, and there are a lot of people who remember it to this day. And a lot of it was investigative reporting. I mean, the other two people who founded the paper with me were also journalism majors. But the money we used to start the paper, the magazine, was based on our winnings. We submitted a series of articles to the William Randolph Hearst newspaper contest.
Yeah, the what do you call it, when they give you grants or something like that?
And we won first place for a series of articles we did, of which I was the inside person on the food service, the cafeteria food at Syracuse University, and
well, that's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah, and so I didn't go into journalism professionally right away after that because I also got a Fulbright scholarship out of Syracuse, and that took me down to Venezuela, where I did a variety of projects, including I worked for the Time Life News, the bureau for the Time Life magazine.
Right.
And they got a start in that field.
Well, that's a pretty good start.
It worked out well. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And then, after the Fulbright, I went for a master's degree for Latin American studies, so Tulane University fellowship there as well, and that led to being drafted into the U.S. Army, because that was Vietnam days. Very time.
Yep.
And
how old were you then?
25, 26, something like that. I don't remember.
So all this up to 25, 26, you've done all this. And at 25, 26, that's your...
Yeah. Well, it's even more extraordinary. I mean, that was a very busy time. But knowing that I was prime material for getting drafted at that point.
Right.
I applied to the Peace Corps, as an alternative. And that was all well and good, except that I was too demanding. I said I wanted to go to a Quechua-speaking country, South American Quechua, and they didn't have any openings right away, so I couldn't do that. So then I was approached by a CIA recruiter, and I was recruited into the CIA, so you talk about a lot going on.
So you were a CIA operative at one time?
No, I was, and this is strange as well. So I was in officer training school in Virginia, and I got my draft notice anyway. So I was drafted out of the CIA into the Army. I would not have thought that would happen. Of course, that was not part of my plan.
Not even thought that was possible.
Well, it's their reason. Maybe they didn't really want me in it. They didn't say that, but I passed all the stuff.
Yeah.
And what they said was, the only way they could get me out of that was by telling the draft board, and then that would blow the cover of, So,
yeah,
it was what it was.
Yeah.
So I'm then in the whole shebang, headed to Vietnam. And then a friend, the guy who beat me out for president of senior class in high school, he was getting married in Washington, D.C., invited me to come and be in his wedding. I did that, and I said, what the hell, the Pentagon is in Washington. So I just walked into the Pentagon and found the guy.
Just walked in.
Just walked into the Pentagon and found the guy who was in charge of assignments into military intelligence. Figured I'd parlay that very brief. It was only 2-3 months maybe.
Right.
But sure enough, this guy with stripes that was all the way down, all the way back down, he listened to me and he said, okay, report back to your unit. So I did. Just a few weeks before shipping out to Vietnam, I get my orders to go to Army Intelligence School. So that's what I did.
That's an odd string of events.
Yes, it was. Very much. Yeah. So anyway, after Vietnam, then I, rather than come back to the States right away, I traveled the rest of the way around the world and spent a fair amount of time in Africa.
Adventures in Africa, like how long were you over there?
Well, probably about 10 months. But the main thing was that I re-established a tie to one of my professors at Syracuse University, Maxwell School of Studies. Mm-hmm. He was a guy who had gone back to Africa to become the George Washington of his country. So this was a guy who, his country was Mozambique, which is sort of right next to South Africa.
Right.
And he had started the independence movement. And I re-met him and did a big interview with him at his headquarters in the neighboring country, Tanzania. And then he was assassinated with a book bomb just 2 months after I re-met him. But so a lot of what I did was doing reporting around the wars of liberation in the Portuguese, well, South Africa, the apartheid.
In general.
Yeah. So, and then back to the States, and that's where I went to work for the Associated Press after that. And that led, in the long run, it led to my coming to Corrales.
Corrales. So when did you kind of get out of that your travels and decide that it's time to just settle down and start a newspaper?
So I resigned from the Associated Press in protest over the Cambodia invasion. I don't know if you remember the Cambodia invasion. I resigned and went to work for the Toronto Star, Canada's leading newspaper at the time, because I knew that they needed somebody who knew what they were talking about reporting for Latin America. Yeah. So I had picked up a fellowship from the Inter-American Press Association. So it's an association of newspapers from all over the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
And they gave me a fellowship to Brazil primarily because I was probably the only applicant who spoke Portuguese. So, well, I mean, good enough reason, probably.
Yeah. Good choice of languages to learn.
Well, I already had Spanish, and then I was added Portuguese to that, so I, did a lot of good reporting out of Brazil, and then moved over to Africa at that point for my second trip over to Africa. So at that point, then that's when I realized that my son was now 5 years old and he didn't know anything about American culture. So came back to the States and found a job here. It was offered to me on the old Albuquerque News. I don't know if you know the Albuquerque News.
Boy, that's way back. Way back when. That's way. So did Albuquerque News turn into the Albuquerque Journal and the Tribune, or
no?
Did it kind of fade away?
It faded away. It had new ownership at some point.
Did Albuquerque News turn into the Albuquerque Journal and the Tribune, or
no?
Did it kind of fade away?
It faded away. It had new ownership at some point, and at any rate, I did that for a couple of years, award-winning years, and it was the golden years of that paper. People like Didi Feldman was a reporter for me, and Arturo Sandoval. You probably don't know Arturo, but had a really good crew that was writing for me. So
Good.
And won a best feature for the Albuquerque Press Club's. I wrote an article based on the Corrales Bosque. It was, I think the title was Saturday, Sunday, and the Bosque. And it was sort of written from the viewpoint of the critters out of the bosque, Sunday meaning a lot of humans out.
Right.
And, they just sort of hunkered down. And
How is humans interacting with?
Well, and mainly, what the difference from the wildlife standpoint, they, mainly just hide when all that's going on. Come Monday, and all the humans go back to their homes, and all the
animals come back out.
Do their thing. Yeah. So anyway, I won best feature from the 1976 or 77 or something. I started the newspaper here in 1982. And I can explain a little bit as to why I did that and what my expectations were, if you'd like me to go into that.
I'd love that. Yeah, because this is the stuff that Corrales is based on. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's going on in the 70s, because Corrales was incorporated in what, 73? 73. So a lot of things changed.
71, I think.
71, I think, yeah. A lot of things changed after we got incorporated, and then the village started coming together. And it's a lot of people don't realize that a small village like Corrales is a living entity where things change continuously over a period of time. And that's why you see in the old days the council was made up of the guy that owned the gas station or somebody else. But now, as things are becoming more demanding, you have to have more talented people on the council and on all these committees and things like that. And you've got more talented people coming in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or more background, say talented, but more background.
Yeah.
But go ahead and continue with your...
So I was interested in starting a newspaper as a public participation medium. So I have overseas, I've lived and worked among dictatorships in Latin America and in Africa. And the notorious one, a lot of people know that I had a personal one-on-one interview with Idi Amin in Uganda back in those days. And, you know, he was not the only one or necessarily the even worst one. But
Right.
I came to appreciate democracy in a way that, you know, aside from whatever I learned in the Maxwell School of Citizenship at Syracuse, you know, my professional and personal experience living in and under dictatorships made me convinced that, you know, democracy was really where it was at.
Yeah.
And part of that is figuring out how to use my journalistic background as a means of fostering public involvement in the democratic process. So that's what I've done for 40 years. I have, you know, my newspaper has always been timed to come out on the Saturday before the village council meetings. So village council meetings have been the second and fourth Tuesdays.
Right, Tuesdays.
Used to be second, fourth Mondays, but, you know. And so my idea was that I would come out with the newspaper talking about the various issues that are going to be addressed and or decided at the coming council meeting. I would come out with that on a Saturday, and people would talk to their neighbors over the back fence and say, "Wow, we really don't like that."
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
You know,
Get some banter back and forth.
yeah, and so then they presumably would show up at the council meetings and express their opinions. So that's basically what I've done for 40 years. And it has meant that, you know, almost never do I have, you know, 2 weekends. I mean, 2 weekends of every month, I am behind my typewriter computer working. And, you know, I get up every other, like this weekend, will be off, and I will try to relax a little bit, take care of things that I'm behind on, which is, and you mentioned the COVID and the situation. I could easily talk about that if you don't mind me interrupting and going in that direction.
No, go ahead.
All right, so, you know, I'm now 79 years old, and at the point in which things should be getting easier for me, they got much more difficult because of the pandemic. So, like, you know, the people who I had working with me, office help, one thing or another, couldn't come in because they were the caregiver for their aged grandparents.
So all the work, a lot of work, more work falls back on you.
Oh, yeah. And I've always assumed from the very earliest days that I could do everything that needed to be done. I do have an art background. I could do the graphics. I have a writing background. I could do that. I've actually sold ads before as well. There was very little, if anything, that I couldn't do. Doesn't mean that, you know, energy-wise, I could do it, especially at 79 years old.
The old engine starts to run down.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I mean, there are occasionally I have had to work into the wee hours, you know, meaning 2, 3 o'clock in the morning even. And somebody who's 79 years old shouldn't be working into 3 o'clock.
2 or 3, you should be asleep.
For several hours.
Yeah.
So, but, I mean, and I don't mind doing that. But what it means is that I can tell that it takes me a lot longer to recover if I were 20 or 30, you do that, and the next
yeah.
day or the
Yeah.
next day after that, you're
Yeah.
fine. Right?
Yeah.
Well, not so much when you're almost 80 years old.
Yeah.
It takes, I can bounce back, but not the next day.
I could do anything I used to do, but it takes me twice as long and 3 times the time to bounce back from it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been dealing with.
Yeah.
And, I have not gotten COVID myself, but I'm also pretty careful. The people who had been working with me, they have fallen by the way for a variety, at least in 2 or 3 cases, because
Right.
they were treating
Family
parents,
members or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's gotten a lot more difficult at a time when, it's harder and harder for me to bounce back.
Right.
So I've always said, I've started 3 other publications in my life, including the one at Syracuse University, which I talked about. And when I started the Corrales Comment, I really wanted it to be sustainable, something that would continue. And, well, I've continued it for 40 years.
Yes, you have.
But on the other hand, it would be nice if it continued after the point in which I can no longer really do it anymore.
Yes.
So, that's basically where I am now. And there are 2 entities who have expressed an interest in taking over the paper. I'm not going to say who they were at
That's
this
fine.
point.
That's fine.
But
You're looking at the end game is, you're looking at the end game now.
and trying to find somebody who would keep the paper going. My son, who's also a writer, editor, author, he would always say, I can't do what you do. And my answer is, well, you don't have to do what I do.
Well, your son is Ben Radford, right?
Right.
Right, and he's been on, just listening to him on NPR radio the other day.
Sure.
Yeah,
And the Discovery Channel.
He has accomplished his own.
Yeah, he has written 20 books, and and he's been the managing editor of a magazine called Skeptical Inquirer.
Yeah.
So, and he's written a movie review for the paper for the last 30 years or so.
Yeah.
But, I have very scrupulously avoided trying to twist his arm. I say, that way lies resentment. Don't,
Well, that way he's gonna, if he want, but he has been a help to you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because you've got your own little publishing company too, don't you? You publish some books.
The book publishing company.
Yeah.
And that's still going as well. I hope the newspaper continues. And a lot of people hope that I'm able to find a way to have that happen as well. There is a lot of positive feedback. It's literally true that I can't go to the Corrales post office without somebody stopping me to tell me how much they appreciate me.
Yes. That's the majority of the people that live in Corrales, that have lived in Corrales. If you go, well, what's going on in Corrales? I don't know. Let me see what's going on. Let me read the comment.
Right.
Let me read the comment.
And, even those who, don't necessarily read every issue cover to cover, they really appreciate the fact that I'm still doing it, and they know that they can turn to it.
Well, I have been letter to the editor myself several times. But the nicest thing about the comment is it tries to keep things level.
Yeah.
It tries to be not partisan and not too radical one way or the other. Because this is Corrales, and you've got very conservative people in Corrales. You've got very liberal people in Corrales. And as one of the counselors way back when said, most people in Corrales come out here and go, we're happy just to be out here. We don't have an opinion one way or another.
Right. Yeah. So I still publish the paper so that it's a vehicle for the people of Corrales to try to get and assure that they can have the kind of community that they want.
Jeff,
Yeah.
thank you for stopping by. We appreciate the history lesson and all your insight on Corrales.
My pleasure. It's been a long, long road.
It has. You take care.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.